An eminent historian, honored in his field, once handed a younger colleague the whole secret of the craft. Present all the facts. Then stand back. First, because no one can ever present all the facts, and second, because even if you could, the facts would say nothing at all. His words are unforgettable. But if the facts do not speak for themselves, then someone has to make them speak. And the moment the historian does that, a harder question opens up beneath him. If the facts mean only what the historian makes them mean, is history any more useful than opinion in period costume? That is the question Bernard Lonergan takes up in chapter 9 of Method and Theology. And it is the question that decides whether the whole first phase of theology can be trusted. In the last episode, ended by handing one of two questions. When historians describe what they actually do, does their own testimony confirm Lonergan's account of historical knowledge? And can history be objective if no historian ever escapes his own standpoint? This chapter answers both, and it answers them from the outside. In chapter 8, Lonergan built his account of history from the inside, out of his own theory of knowing. Here he puts that account on trial, against the handbooks that once taught the method, against the historians who practiced it, against the German philosophers who tried to explain it, and he runs the trial on one deliberately narrow issue: the relationship between historical facts and their connections. Lonergan uses the German word for the unintelligible links that bind scattered facts into a single course of events. Do the facts come first and the connections after? Or do they arrive together in one piece? He takes 3 handbooks from the 19th century and lines them up. Johann Gustav Droysen comes first. For Droysen, the historian never settles the facts first and finds their connections later. Lonergan states his position in a single image. Facts and interconnections form a single piece, a garment without seam. You discover them together in one movement. Advance through research to understanding. Then Ernst Bernheim. At first glance, Bernheim seems to cut the seam. He settles the facts by criticism, and only then determines their connections. But read him closely, Lonergan says, and Bernheim taught the opposite. The determination of events and the grasp of their connections are interdependent and inseparable. The third handbook, by Langlois and Segenbos. Here the seam is finally cut clean. Modeled on positivist natural science, their method treats every document like a laboratory observation. Criticism reduces the facts, in their own phrase, to a powder. And once the facts are a powder, someone has to reassemble them at enormous risk. The risk was so great that Langlois eventually gave up writing history altogether and spent his life reproducing documents instead. And out of that positivist world came the question we started with: why add anything to the facts? Is it not every edition merely the historian's subjectivity? Why not simply let the facts speak for themselves? Here, Lonergan inserts a distinction that dissolves the whole positivist dream. Data are one thing, facts are another. Data are what is given: a monument, a manuscript, a coin, a line in a chronicle. They sit there, perceptible, whether or not anyone ever understands them. A fact is something else. A fact is a known event, and knowing it is never just looking. Knowing is experience, understanding, and judgment working together. So a fact carries the concreteness of something experienced, the precision of something understood, and the stubbornness of something reasonably affirmed. And here is the consequence that breaks the positivist paradigm. The facts do not merge before the data are understood. They emerge only after the data have been understood satisfactorily and thoroughly. Because in critical history, there are two processes, not one. The first process sifts the sources and grades each one for reliability. But what it produces is not yet historical knowledge. It is historical experience. The bits and pieces that happen to catch the eye of some diarist, some chronicler, some letter writer. It is only data for discovery of facts. The second process reconstructs. It pieces the fragments together into what was actually going forward. Only there, at the end of the second process, do the historical facts finally emerge. Not in the sources, but in the reconstruction. So much for the handbooks. Now, the practitioners, and they confirm the account, return to Carl Becker. 16 years before he called the facts miserable, he discovered what really happens as the historian goes over his cards. Some catch his interest, others fade. Some start a new train of thought, some connect, some sit inert. And the whole selection, Becker said, is only half deliberate. It is the whole a perceiving mass that does the work, building each new impression into its own growing content. Lonergan reads that description and recognizes it instantly. It is a happy description, he says, of the gradual accumulation of insights, each insight complementing, qualifying, correcting the ones before, until the questions dry up and experience is promoted to knowledge. Becker could never build a theory of knowing, but he could describe one without knowing that was what he was doing. Then Collingwood in England, attacking the very same illusion. He gave it a contemptuous name: scissors and paste history. History that gathers statements, tests them for credibility, pastes the true ones into a scrapbook, and drops the rest in the wastebasket. And against it, Collingwood set what he called a Copernican revolution. History that is at once critical and constructive. History that builds, by imagination and by a logic of question and answer, a web of linking the fixed points the sources supply. And those fixed points, he insisted, are fixed only relatively. They are held steady by earlier historical knowledge. The odd marks on a page of Thucydides become fixed points only because prior knowledge lets you read Greek, trust the passage, and judge that Thucydides meant to tell the truth. So history, taken as a whole discipline, is autonomous. It is not believing authorities, and it is not inferring from authorities. The historian is his own authority. Lonergan admires this and corrects it in the same breath, because Collingwood wrapped it in idealism. Introduce a sound theory of judgment, Lonergan says, and the idealism falls away while everything true in Collingwood stands. Then, in France, Henri-Irénée Marrou traded the relentless suspicion of his positivist teachers for sympathy and understanding. And he describes knowledge advancing along a spiral. The better you understand the documents, the better you understand the events. And the better you understand the events, the more the documents give up. 3 historians, 3 countries, 1 account. But behind all 3 stands a single German word: Verstehen, understanding. The German historical school was empirical without being empiricist. It knew historical knowledge is never a matter of taking a good look. It saw the need for understanding in 2 places. First, in the hermeneutic circle, where the word is understood through the sentence and the sentence through the words. And second, in the sheer individuality of what history studies, because the greater the genius, the less it fits under any general rule. Lonergan puts it with a flourish: there is only one Divina Commedia, only one Hamlet by Shakespeare, only one two-part Faust by Goethe. No universal law reaches those. Only understanding does. And that insight passed down a lineage. From Becker to Droysen, from Droysen to Delphi, who asked the sharpest question of all in the end: how is historical knowledge even possible? Dilthey took Hegel's objective spirit and brought it down to earth into ordinary human living. Living expresses itself, and in the expression, life interprets itself. Lonergan honors the whole tradition. Then he corrects it on 3 points, and the 3 corrections matter. First, what they call understanding, he calls insight, and insight is broader and more exact. It runs through mathematics as much as through history, and it happens before you ever put it into words. Second, and this is decisive, the tradition stopped one level short. His sentence is the hinge of the chapter. Experience and understanding taken together yield not knowledge but only thought. To reach knowledge, you must add a third act, judgment. The reasonable grasp that something is, in fact, so. And because the tradition never fully sees that third level, it can never break cleanly from either empiricism or idealism. Third, it never shook off the oldest myth of all, that knowing is a kind of looking. It is not. Now the chapter reaches its center, and it reaches it through a crisis. In 1932, Carl Heuristic published a small book on the crisis of the historian. Around the year 1900, he said historians assumed the past was stably given and unequivocally structured, one fixed object sitting still waiting to be copied. That assumption collapsed, and the collapse felt like the death of objectivity because no one will ever relate everything that happened at the Battle of Leipzig over those 4 days in 1813. The historian must select, and selection depends on standpoint, so different historians, honestly working, produce different histories. This is the moment the whole discipline can fall into despair, and here Lonergan introduces the word that saves it: perspectivism. That is not relativism, and the difference between the two is everything. His formulation of perspectivism is exact. Where relativism has lost hope about the attainment of truth, perspectivism stresses the complexity of what the historian is writing about. Relativism says the truth cannot be reached. Perspectivism says the truth is vast, and each honest account reaches part of it. And it comes from 3 facts, no more. The historian is finite, it cannot know everything. The historian selects, and selection cannot be fully pinned down, not even by the one doing it. And the historian is himself a historical being, so his very standpoint keeps shifting under him. From those 3 facts follow different histories. But mark the word carefully. Different, not contradictory. Incomplete and approximate portrayals of an enormously complex reality. That is why history is rewritten for each new generation, and why that rewriting is not scandal at all. Now watch Lonergan correct even Heuristic. Heuristic thought that structures were only in the minds of men. Lonergan will not go there. The past is fixed and its intelligible structures are unequivocal. What is incomplete is not the past, it is our knowledge of the past. That one correction is what keeps perspectivism from sliding back into relativism it was built to escape. And it leaves us a strange gift. When an old historian goes out of fashion and is later rediscovered, the rediscovery tells us little that it is new about his subject, but it tells us everything about him. His account becomes a first-rate witness, not on the past he wrote about, but on the man who wrote it. But not every difference between historians is this benign, and Lonergan is too honest to pretend otherwise. Return one last time to Becker. He studied an old rule. A fact is established by two independent witnesses. And he asked a sharp question. When will a historian call a witness self-deceived? And his answer is actually unsettling, because he says that when the historian is already convinced the event is impossible, that's when. The two witnesses will not move him. 200 will not move him. Becker's line has teeth. It is easier for him to believe that any number of witnesses are self-deceived than for him to admit that the impossible has actually occurred. So what the historian finds in the archive was partially decided before he opened it. Can miracles happen? If a historian has built his entire world on the certainty that they cannot, then no testimony will ever reach him. He does not weigh the witnesses, he disqualifies them. This is not about facts anymore, it's about horizon. A horizon is the world a historian already lives in before he opens a single source, absorbed from his age, his teachers, the climate of opinions he was raised inside of. And a horizon is not a detail you can edit. It is the frame that decides which details are even possible. To change it is to tear down and rebuild the whole structure. Lonergan's image here is exact when he says that it cannot be comparable to major surgery. It's like taking the whole body apart. And most of us grasp the knife gingerly and wield it clumsily. So why not simply demand a historian with no horizon at all? No? No presuppositions, no inherited convictions, a perfectly empty head. Well, because that is the principle of the empty head again, and it's a fantasy. A historian with no presuppositions would be a historian with no education, stripped of his culture, his formation, his very historicity. Newman said it best against Descartes and his universal doubt. It would be better to believe everything than to doubt everything, because universal doubt leaves you nothing to build on, while universal belief at least holds some truth that time can slowly purify. So Lonergan lets the historian keep his horizon, and he admits the price. Different horizons produce not merely different histories, but incompatible ones, irreconcilable ones. And here critical history reaches its limit because these conflicts cannot be settled by more research. They demand a change in horizon, and a change in horizon is conversion. His words point straight past this whole specialty, for any notable change of horizon is done not on the basis of that horizon, but by envisaging a quite different and at first sight incomprehensible alternative, and then undergoing a conversion. That work belongs to later specialties. It does not belong to history. Before he closes, Lonergan asks what actually guides the historian at his desk. Does he use analogy, ideal types, a theory of history? Take analogy first. The historian assumes the past is like the present, except where the evidence shows it is not. That is legitimate, but the moment he insists the past must be like the present, he has stopped doing history. He is only importing the prejudice of his own age. The ancient Greeks and Romans controlled the size of their populations by exposing newborn infants. That fact does not become doubtful just because it lies outside the experience of modern committee. No? And on the hardest case of all, Lonergan says something his audience should not miss. The 19th century thought natural laws expressed iron necessity. We no longer think that laws are verified probabilities holding only when other things are equal. His conclusion is dry and deliberate. Evidently, the scientific case concerning miracles has weakened. Then ideal types comes in. Okay? An ideal type is not a description of reality, not a hypothesis about it. It's a deliberate construct built from the clearest instances used to throw a real situation into sharper relief. Useful, Lonergan says, and dangerous, because Marrou warned that grand theories of history, pushed too hard, become, in his phrase, big anti-comprehension machines. Machines that seem to explain everything and therefore notice nothing. And is history value-free? In two senses, yes. It does not exist to push a cause, and it settles facts by evidence, not by preference. But in one sense, no. The historian's true value judgments are exactly what led him select what is worth knowing at all. Strip those out, and you are back to the empty head. So now, how does the historian hold this balance across all of this? By one discipline, stated as 4 commands. Be attentive, be intelligent, be reasonable, be responsible. And the historian may not even know he is following them. Just as Moliere's Monsieur Jourdan spoke excellent French without knowing that his talk was prose. That leaves Lonergan one last distinction, and it fixes history's place for good. He proposes a convention. Reserve the word science for knowledge held in principles and laws, verified everywhere or else revised, and use the word scholarship for something else. A common sense grasp of common sense thought, speech, and action of distant places and times. The historian is not a scientist, he is a scholar, not because his work is softer or looser, because it reaches a different kind of intelligibility, the concrete kind, the kind that lives in trained common sense rather than in universal law. That is not a demotion, it is a location. So let me draw the whole chapter together. History gets rewritten in every generation, and Lonergan has told us exactly why. Some of that difference is perspectivism. Finite historians selecting from real standpoints, each reaching part of an inexhaustible past. Different, but not contradictory. Nothing to fear. And some of it is not perspectival at all. Some of it comes from horizons, from what a historian decided was possible before he ever began, and those differences can be flatly irreconcilable. Critical history can live with the first kind, it cannot resolve the second, because the second kind is not settled by evidence, it is settled by conversion. In the next episode, we move to dialectic, because once Lonergan has shown that the deepest conflicts among historians come from opposed horizons, the next question can no longer be postponed. How do you drag those buried conflicts into the open and tell the oppositions that enrich our knowledge from the ones that quietly corrupt it?